And I bet you didn't have near as bad a day as what Job's gone through. My, oh my, when we look at all the things that Job has experienced and the emotional, the psychological, the physical, and the spiritual dynamic of it all, it's overwhelming. And we all go through these things, certainly not to the extent that Job has gone through. But at least we can see and study these things, and there's a lot we can learn by it as such. Well, we're down to verse 11 here on the second chapter of Job. And notice we're introducing the friends of Job now. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil and that was come upon him, they came every one, that's all 3 of them, from his own place, his own hometown, Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Friends are good. We all need friends. Job's situation is kind of unique. He was a very wealthy man. As we've already seen, as Scripture plainly said, he was the wealthiest man in all the East. In terms of his wealth today, he would be classified a multi-millionaire. Not necessarily a billionaire, but a multi-millionaire. We all tend to look at people who are rich, have everything that money can buy, enjoying all this and experiencing all this, and we forget that they go through some things that the average person will never go through because we're not wealthy. We don't have everything. We have to plan our money. We have to figure out what we can spend and what we can't spend. But those with money, they just go and buy and do this and do that and think nothing of it. But that brings along a lot of baggage. You'll notice he has 3 friends. They're not even from the same area that Job lives in. But they know him, and he knows them. And they're classified as friends. They are probably fairly well-to-do, but not as well-to-do as Job, because, well, Job is the richest man in the East. And all 3 of the areas that are named here that they came from are in the East. So they don't really understand some of the things that rich people go through. Rich people can be very lonely because they have to isolate themselves, because people want them, more specifically, they want a piece of their money. They want to have a connection with them because of the wealth, that they might solicit something from them. That has a tendency to shut rich people off, isolate them. And they have to identify themselves with people who are somewhat in the same neighborhood that they're in, like these 3 friends that are mentioned here in the Scripture. And you would have thought, if it's you and I, we'd have probably had 40 or 50 people as friends, but we wouldn't be rich. Another thing you need to realize about rich people, particularly the mega rich, as Job would be classified, Their number one fear is losing their wealth. All rich people go through that. No matter how wealthy they are, the fear is if it starts to lose, I could lose it all. And sometimes that happens. In 1929, when the stock market collapsed, there was any number of people who had never had any money at all. On paper, they were millionaires in 1929 because of all the stock that they bought on credit. And when the stock market collapsed, they lost everything. And many of them committed suicide. How do I live? What's going to happen to me now? And of course, those of us who live from paycheck to paycheck, which is what most people do, we don't have that problem. We know there's a certain boundary that we're going to run out, that sort of thing, but we've adjusted to that. But rich people don't adjust to that, at least not very well. And so Job's friends planned to come and help Job. And how were they going to help him? Was to mourn with him and to comfort him. Now that's something that's very difficult to do. When people have experienced a loss, that loss is individual to them. And oftentimes, if we've never been through identically the same situation that they went through, we don't understand that. Hard for us to comprehend and understand. But the word mourning, as it is used here, and it is a good word, speaks of death. It speaks of loss. It speaks of suddenly having your world so fall completely apart. And that person finds himself in a state of hopelessness. And all of this works on them and is very harmful to them. They don't know how to deal with this. So when people come together, as these three, just from this verse alone, they apparently understood he is in mourning. And we're going to go there to mourn with him. Not to put him down, not to lift themselves above him, but to join him in his suffering, to identify with it at least to some degree of understanding. And then the next word that is used here is comfort. The word comfort there means to build up or to encourage, to help them through this difficult time, to understand and to build up and encourage. But we are going to see that these three friends, when they found out the great depth of mourning and grief that Job was going through, they couldn't deal with it themselves. They couldn't comprehend it themselves. But at least initially, they did their best. They tried their hardest. But what we need to do is understand that when people have lost something that was very important to them, he lost his wealth. Job, at that point in time, was in poverty. the richest man in the East, literally ended up within days in total poverty. He can't take care of himself, let alone take care of his wife. He has lost his 10 children in a single disaster. They were well, they were healthy, they were happy, and then they're dead, they're gone. He lost his servants. They died. How do you pick up these pieces? How do you put them all together? Kind of makes the things we go through look kind of silly, doesn't it? Yeah, oh, I had a hard day at work today. Boss got mad at me. Well, you get the idea of the difference here. And these 3 friends of Job's really had no idea what they were coming into. I feel for them because they didn't relate and understand what Job was going through. We need to always try to make those connections. All right, let's look on. Verse 12. And when they, the 3 friends, lifted up their eyes afar off, they set up a time they were going to come to be a comfort to Job, to mourn with him, to try to help him out in some way. And they are far off, meaning, as we're going to see here, they could see him in the distance. But they did not recognize how badly he was now deteriorated. Because in addition to losing all the things that he possessed, he lost his health. And the type of disease that he had left this man in a constant state of pain. Physical pain. He's going through emotional pain. He's going through psychological pain. He's going through spiritual pain. Though he did not accuse God of anything, he wondered where God was at in all this. But he kept that to himself. So we're looking at a man that is at the point of physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual breakdown. He's at that point. All right? They lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not. Meaning they knew it was Job. Oh my word! His body was emaciated. He had all these sores all over his body. He was in agony and pain. They didn't recognize that. They didn't know it was that bad. They, the friends, lifted up their voice and wept. And they, the friends, ripped and tore, every one, all 3 of them, his mantle or outer garment, and sprinkled dust up on their heads toward heaven. They're sprinkling dust on their head as they're looking up to heaven. This is the way in the Middle East in those days they would show grief, sorrow, heartache, pain, suffering. And anybody that saw anybody doing these things and going through this and calling out, yelling, screaming, crying out, knows and realizes these people are suffering right along with Job. It was worse than they had anticipated. They had heard the reports, and they knew this, and they knew that, and they thought this, and they thought that, and like all of us, we had come to some kind of conclusion. And now they see him. He's death, walking around. Well, not doing a whole lot of walking, actually. But he's dying. They're looking at him. He's suffering miserably. Oh my! So here's what they concluded and what they did. So they, the three friends, sat down with him, Job, upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And none, including Job, spoke a word. But specifically, none of them, the three of them, said nothing to him. For they saw that his grief was very great. The term and phrasing it is used there indicates this was a grief like nobody had ever seen before. And when you think about what all he went through, how many people do you know that goes through all that? And so they sat in silence. Job said nothing for 7 days and 7 nights. They said nothing for 7 days and 7 nights. They were there with him. Here is an important thing that we need to learn when people are suffering sorrow, grief, loss. One of the important things is that you are there with them. We kind of reflexively want to say something to try to make them feel better. But initially, that may make them feel worse. Sometimes you sit with them, just being there in silence. As a pastor, I've been with people that have gone through grief. Nothing like what Job went through, but nevertheless, they've gone through grief. And sometimes they don't want to talk. I don't try to talk either. I am there with them. And when they speak, I respond to that. They have to work their way through this. We would like to go in and say, hey, feel better. God's in control. All things are going to be well. That creates more pain and hurt than you can imagine to somebody who has suffered a loss. They lost their spouse. They lost a child. They lost their job. They lost their home. They lost their health. We need to comfort. We need to recognize that they are hurting. And we're not going to, in an instant, remove that hurt from them. A person who is going through this type of sorrow and grief, they have to work it out at their own rate. All we can do is be of an encouragement and a help as they work their way through this. Now Job is going to start speaking. He'll be the first to speak. And boy, when we look at what he had to say, you sit back and say, what in the world am I going to say to help him here? He is emptying himself of these things. And a person in grief will oftentimes say things and even do things that if it wasn't for the sorrow, grief, and misery that they're going through, they would never say those things and they would never do those things. It is an avenue to get it out. The worst thing a person in grief can do is internalize it and not let it out. And so we who are those who are there to mourn with them and to comfort them is to accept what they have to say and do without condemnation, without correction, without coming across like we know more about this than you know about it when we don't know nothing about it compared to what they're experiencing. Pain and suffering, death and dying, grief and sorrow are individual items to each one individually. And everybody deals with those differently because we're all different people. We need to understand those things. And so somebody doesn't respond the way we think they ought to. We need to understand of what they're going through and give them time. Some people can recover fairly quickly. For example, to lose someone in death, the average expectation for recovery is 3 to 9 months, sometimes a year. And on other occasions, it can go more than that. It all depends on the individual and the situation and the circumstances as they try to work their way through these things. But we want to get through this as quick as possible. One of the things that I have found out that the way funerals are held today is a long distance from what they used to be. My father told me about the way back in West Virginia when people died. The period of mourning and the wake, as they would call it, would last 2 weeks or more, 14 days or more. But everybody was getting it out. People would come and go, usually in the house where the person lived. That's where this would all take place. People would come and go, bring food, bring drink, and so on. And all this to help them to get this all worked out. And funeral homes originally did things like that. And now it's dropped down to a day or an hour or two. That's not time enough for anything, really. But that's the person's buried, the person's gone, and that's it. And everybody just grow up and be on your way. But these people carry scars around that they probably will never recover from. Because we look at this and say how senseless this was. And we can't understand. We had a lifetime with them, and now all of a sudden they're gone. And I mean gone. And there needs to be a processing time. Very important to realize that. They saw that his grief was very great. Okay, moving on. Chapter 3, verse 1. The time that they had, 7 days and 7 nights of silence is over. Job is the first to speak. Verse 1. After this, meaning after that 7 days of silence, after this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. I never heard Job talk like that before, did you? The day that he's talking about here that he cursed was his birthday. We're now going to get a picture of what was going on so deeply in Job's heart and life. This is a part of getting things out. Job is going to say a number of things. And then one of the guests, encouragers, comforters, they're going to put him down for it because they really don't understand what is going on. Job is trying to process all of this. He cursed the day that he was born. Basically, this means that he wished that he had never been born. Now, there's any number of us from time to time have gone through some pretty tough times. And we've thought about that maybe. I wish I'd never been born, but we don't voice it as a curse. But that's just something we need to realize what he's doing. He is saying things to get this out. The bad stuff out. And we need to realize that. Going to a funeral home, going to people who've lost somebody, tragedy and this and that and the other. Oftentimes they will say things, do things that shouldn't be said and shouldn't be done under normal circumstances. But you got to realize this is the bad coming out. It's not good to keep internalizing it. Let it out. All right? And Job spake, verse 2, and said, verse 3, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. He wants to get rid of 2 days. 9 months earlier, he was conceived. He wants that day to have never have happened. Now, he knows, and God knows, that that's not going to be reversed. But that's what he wants. He wants that day that he was conceived to be gone, as if it never existed. Therefore, Job would never have been conceived. He wants his birthday gone, as if he was never born. Why? He is in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, grief and sorrow that penetrates to the deepest part of his soul. He is hurting. And when you're hurting, what do you want? More pain? No. You want it gone. And that's what he's expressing. It would have been better if I had never been conceived. But since I was conceived, it would have been better if I had never been born. That I died in the womb. Wow. Think about that for a moment. All right. Let the day perish as if it never existed. Verse 4. let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Now he's talking there specifically about his birthday. Once the day gone, in its place, darkness, death. He'd say, how can this man who loves God and lives such a holy life, and God had such wonderful things, say things like this? That was still true of Job, that he was a godly man. That didn't change. The pain is what's doing the talking. The hurt that is there deep inside. And so we need to realize that sometimes Christians go through excruciating things and times. Not because God forgot us, not because God walked off from us. We've already seen the stage set. The accuser of the brethren, the devil, came to God and said, take away his wealth and he'll curse you to your face. And God said to the devil, you can take that away. And Job never cursed God. And then the death of his children. He'll curse you. But he didn't. Every detail, as the scripture plainly says, Job did not sin with his lips. He said nothing inappropriate. Well, what about all this cursing business? In the situation as it was, that was not directed to God. Job was directing that to himself. If I hadn't have been born, none of this would have happened. Our time is gone, but we'll pick up here the next time we meet.